Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Geoff Redknap, a veteran makeup effects artist whose credits include everything from Fido and Wind Chill and Pathfinder to Watchmen and Mission Impossible 4 and Final Destination 5 and The Cabin in the Woods and Arrow and Fringe and Supergirl and Legends of Tomorrow and The Flash and Arrow. The list goes on and on and on. He's also been building a solid portfolio of short films, and his first feature, The Unseen, starring Aidan Young as a mill worker hiding a life-changing secret, arrives on iTunes today after its Toronto theatrical run. It's a genre film unlike any other genre film I've seen before, and it's well worth a look. Geoff picked No Country for Old Men, Joel and Ethan Coen's Oscar-winning 2007 adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's acclaimed 2005 novel about three men in small-town Texas. A cop, a killer, and the opportunistic civilian whose impulsive action sets them all on a collision course with one another. Featuring expert work from Tommy Lee Jones, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, and Kelly MacDonald, and beautifully photographed by Roger Deakins, the film wowed audiences on the festival circuit and went on to win Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Supporting Actor for Bardem. It's hard to argue against any of those, so we didn't even try. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I chose No Country for Old Men because it's probably the most inspiring film I've seen since it came out.
Okay.
Like, even today, I've seen a lot of good films, a lot of great films, but there was something about the experience of watching No Country. I saw it at the Toronto Film Festival the year it came out, which was what,
2007?
Yeah, I was getting this one wrong, yeah. But I saw it in like September.
Sure.
Is that when TIFF is?
Yeah, that's when I saw it too.
Yeah, and I remember just being blown away at the theater, just shell-shocked. And I walked out of the theater, and one of the first thoughts that I registered was, wow, the world doesn't know what's coming. Like, this isn't going to get... I think it got released maybe Christmas time of that year.
Yeah, I want to say like late November, early December.
I remember like 3 or 4 months later it was coming out.
Yeah, it took a while.
And at the time, because, sometimes big festival screenings, they're like a week before it goes wide. And in this case, I knew it was going to be sitting dormant for 3 months. And I just could not believe that the world had to wait 3 months to see what I just saw. And it's going to just wreck them. Like, everybody I talked to who I knew would appreciate this, I didn't spoil it, but I just said, the latest Coen Brothers movie is going to blow your mind. It just changes everything. And I've had a few experiences with films like that where, like, they are just so they make such an impression that your head is in a fog and you're just dazed and you talk about it for days. Like, Pulp Fiction was one of those films where I just saw it and I'd never seen anything like that. And I went to Denny's, I think, with friends after, and we sat there for 2.5 hours talking about it. And I remember that just like for 3 days, that's all we talked about. And I probably went back and saw it again like that week. It was so crazy. But No Country was one of those movies where it was just like it validated so many things about filmmaking that I know it's not arrogant, but things I love, but also things that I wanted to do in film.
Sure. Yeah.
And I had a lot of people tell me, you can't do that, like no music, such a laconic lead character, so little dialogue in some ways. It's not, not the most dialogue-free movie, but I had a short film I wanted to do at some point, and the people that were going to make it with me, they didn't think it would work. They were telling me, no, it doesn't work. You can't do it that way. You can't do it that way. And I pulled out Once Upon a Time in the West, and I made them watch the opening train station sequence.
Sure, yeah.
And after they saw that, they went, okay, you can do it. It could work. Because that movie, like the first, 7-8 minutes of the movie, there's no dialogue.
Yeah, no,
and
it's so stark and...
Yeah, and that is similar to this in that, like, the sound design in that sequence it's a little dated, but it's still amazing. And all the little creaks and the windmill. And I put a windmill in a short film of mine just because I wanted to do a little homage to the squeaky windmill, except in my movie it was a lawn ornament. But yeah, in this film, again, like the sound design is just breathtaking. And I watched it again on the flight out here, and I think I heard a sound that I'd never heard before.
Oh yeah.
And it was I was headed on iTunes, and I was like, oh, there's no skip back button, so I don't want to go back 3 minutes because I'm kind of cramming for this. And and I was like, I'm gonna have to go back and see if I did hear the sound that I think I heard.
I'm gonna guess that it's in the motel sequence where there's all those little hidden.
Well, it's kind of an obscure one. It's when he goes to Llewellyn Moss's trailer park, when Sugar goes to. I'm probably gonna mispronounce names.
That's
and stuff.
fine.
But when Sugar goes to the trailer park and he goes into the office and talks to the woman about, he's looking for Llewellyn Moss, and he's like, well, did you check his trailer? And it's like, he's probably at work. I can't give you no information.
Yeah.
That sequence, and he asks her 3 times, where does he work? And she just stands, she keeps saying, did you not hear me?
Yeah.
And at that point, you're like, he's going to kill her. He's going to give her an ultimatum, and he's going to kill her. But then he stops and he leaves. And this time watching it, I think I heard a toilet flush that in the background.
Okay.
That would suggest there's another person there, and that somehow changed his
trajectory.
Yeah, now he's got to kill 2 people, and maybe that person doesn't fit into it because she's breaking his rules of now he's going to make her flip a coin or whatever. But if there's another person there, maybe that ruins it, and maybe that's why there's the sound of a toilet flushing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but everything about it is just brilliant.
Yeah, I don't remember it, but now I don't remember that it's not there either. It certainly sounds like that would make sense. It is. I'm really glad you picked it because 3.5 years in, I'm stunned no one else has. We've had a couple of Coen brothers pictures chosen, but I wonder if this one doesn't occur to people as a definitive. Oh, I want to talk about the Coens. You go to the Big Lebowski or A Serious Man, which are the 2 that have come up.
Yeah,
and those are both kind of perfect representations of what everyone thinks the Coen brothers what everyone thinks the Coen brothers do as a collective, which are antic, verbal, weird, singular experiences that are all about people trying to reason their way into and out of things. And so is this.
Yeah.
But it's set apart by its starkness and its emptiness. And, those guys are in love with language, and almost no dialogue matters because nothing matters, because it's all about the implacability of the things that are coming for you. Like in this film, as in A Serious Man, the attempts to understand it only make things worse by the characters. If they're trying to reason their way out of the problem is just going to roll over them. The universe doesn't care if you know what's going on. And it's so perfect a statement, you can't stop what's coming, the thing that they kept using. Mm-hmm. It's so concise and perfect a statement of what they do as filmmakers, but it's so unlike anything else they've done that it's this thing that occupies its own space within their filmography. And I love it, but I never think about it as a Coen Brothers movie. I just think about it as this incredible, this sumptuous visual experience.
I think there's a lot of people that don't even remember it as a Coen Brothers film, because I think it's more a Cormac McCarthy than a Coen. And we know it as a Coen Brothers film, and there are some things like some of the framing and some of the pacing is Coen, and some of the attention to details is Coen. But apart from Anton Chigurh being such a weird looking character, there's really no quirk in this. A little bit of Western over the top twangy. Yeah. They went on and did True Grit, which is more Coen in a lot of ways. Because they have these weird, overly talkative characters and overly self-expressive. Like Matt Damon's character just goes off at the mouth the whole movie. Yeah. And then he bites off his tongue. It's like it's a lot more Coen than this, but yeah. And watching this movie motivated me to go read Cormac McCarthy.
So I was going to ask if you'd encountered the book beforehand.
I had not encountered it before, but I believe I'm trying to remember the timing on when did The Road come out. It would have been after
a couple of years later, 2009. 2010.
Honestly, I may not have gone this introduced me to Cormac McCarthy, but then I think maybe The Road motivated me to actually read the book.
Okay.
And then I went on and started reading every Cormac McCarthy I could find, and this is a great novel, and The Road is great, but it's a really light novel. There's not a lot of words on the page, and then you start going back in his library, and they start getting thicker.
Yeah.
He's got something called the Border Trilogy, which is actually 3 Western stories, and they're pretty thick books. And I think the one is it All the Pretty Horses? I think Matt Damon did a movie that was Cormac McCarthy, and
Billy Bob Thornton adaptation.
Yeah, I think that might be one of the Border trilogies, and
that makes sense.
And I'm starting to read the second one. I don't remember the name of it. There's one, The Great Plains or the Something Plains. Mm-hmm. I think is one of them. I think Blood Meridian's its own thing, and I read that one, and that one's a dark story. I don't know if apparently what's his name? The actor who just did the Disaster Artist, James Franco. Apparently Franco owns the rights to almost all the Cormac McCarthy books. He was smart enough to buy them before anyone knew who he was. Okay. And that's why he made one of them into a film, The Something Child.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to turn that off 10 minutes in. It was just so
haven't seen it.
Ugly. It's not that it was bad necessarily. It was just so ugly. I just did not feel like experiencing it. So, okay. But he apparently has the rights to Blood Meridian, and it's kind of scary because I don't know if he's ready to make that film or ever will be. And so he'll either make it and fail, or he'll make it and shock us all, or he'll get someone else to direct it, and that might be the better choice.
Yeah. I had heard that among all the other weird little stories you hear about the Coen brothers, because they don't offer very much information about themselves in interviews, even when asked head on. Yeah. Someone had said during TIFF that the reason they made No Country because they couldn't get the Blood Meridian rights.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know that it's true, but it makes sense. I mean, having seen what they do with No Country for Old Men, I think it's possible that they're carrying over some of the darkness of Blood Meridian into it, because the book of No Country is a much easier read. Yeah, it's a sort of a level, even tone. Yeah, as opposed to the sort of insistent, pressing horrors of Blood Meridian, which translates into the movie, where the film is much more dark and foreboding. No Country. Yeah. Than it necessarily read on the page.
I remember the read not being quite so. It was more of a story than... this is a study of violence and study of character, and, some of the violent scenes in this movie are just really shocking. I mean, Shiger's whole cattle stun gun is disturbing, but, I think the first violent act in the movie is when he takes out the deputy that pulls him over and takes him to the station, and it's very disturbing in how long it goes on, and, the moment where he's choking the guy, but then he realizes the handcuffs have cut through his artery, and at that moment he turns his head away because he doesn't want to get blood on his face. And it's just like, oh, that's so disturbing.
Yeah, and the pleasure that he takes in the action. Yeah, and it's the genius of casting Javier Bardem for that, where he is ambiguous to the end in that I don't know if he actually does take pleasure out of everything. He's in the first killing, that first murder, he is into it because it's his solution. Yeah. But then there are all the other ones where, he doesn't seem to be taking pleasure in the opportunity to cause harm. He's not a sadist, but he's compelled. It's the OCD of you have to make a choice. Yeah. So I can know what to do. Yeah. And I think the thing that distresses me the most about him is that he puts so much energy into his purpose. Like, this is a person who knows what he wants to do. He doesn't really seem capable of existing in any other way. I mean, there's no scene where he goes into a diner and just has breakfast. I don't think he eats. I don't know that he is.
He eats peanuts in the gas station.
Yeah.
That's about all I recall.
Does that sustain him? Like, is he just a Terminator? We never really fully know him, and that's so disturbing because everyone else is trying to reason with the problem, and he'll just come in and kill you. It doesn't actually matter what you want him to do. Yeah. Well,
I think he's less about taking pleasure in it than he is and I'm only just sort of piecing this together or remembering it, but I think there's a line where Woody Harrelson's character says that I think he says he has principles because the guy that hires him asked, "What do you know about him?" And he says something, I don't know if the word is principles, but he says something like, he has principle, or because he knows he lives by this weird code, and he's obviously experienced it. And what I'm just sort of putting together now is that this is the story of part of the story is multi-generation lawmen, and they live by a code.
Sure, yeah.
And Tommy Lee Jones's character goes on about how the old timers did it. They didn't carry a gun. They lived by this. And Tommy's got a code. You can see it every step of the way that there's he does things. And what troubles him the most is that he's coming up against something that he doesn't understand. They've never seen this before. They don't know how to respond to it, and it kind of breaks him. I mean, by the end of the film, he's retired unexpectedly. But I think that's an interesting dynamic, that you've got this psychopath guy that lives by a code that he's created, but he lives by it.
Yeah.
So I think when you wonder if he takes pleasure in it, I don't think he so much takes pleasure in it. He cannot break his own code. And at the end, when he kills Carla Jean, she's just like it, telling him point blank, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you don't, I mean, Woody Harrelson's character is a little more predictable in his response to facing Chigurh. He's like, you don't have to do this. And he's like, that's what they all say. And he's like, and he tries to justify it and rationalize his way out of it and, talk his way out. But it's all stuff he's heard before, so it doesn't mean anything to him.
Yeah.
But Carla Jean is a little more defiant. Her response to it is just like, it's stupid. What you're doing is stupid and doesn't make any sense. And she defies him to the end by saying, I won't, I'm not going to call it. I'm not going to let you do that.
Yeah.
And she dies. He walks outside and wipes off his shoe. But that's the weird thing about him. He lives by this code that he's created and somehow floats through life, mostly unscathed until the very end, when just a completely random act does the most harm to him than anything in the movie does and causes him the most... there's the biggest threat to him.
Yeah.
Because the cops are coming and he's injured. He's got a bone sticking out of his arm. So
this is what I mean about him being a Terminator, though. He just gets through it.
Yeah.
He's a functioning assassin, except that he doesn't see himself that way, or maybe he does, or maybe like, we never know anything of his heart. We only know what he needs.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating and distressing, and like the best villains are the ones you can't get all the way inside, or the ones that you completely empathize with but don't know that you don't understand that they're the villain until the very end. The classic reversal thing. This doesn't have any reversals, and this is what I meant about it being a darker film than the novel. Like, Llewellyn is dead from the beginning. Everybody's doomed. Mm-hmm. These people who touch things, who are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the wrong time, and are contaminated by this external force, whatever this evil is, that acts like a magnet that brings Chigurh to them. There's no... It's like the house from The Grudge. You walk in and it's over. Mm-hmm. And you might not be dead right away. It may take a few days for it to find you, but it's over. And that's the thing that the finality of it, the sadness of it, it's leaden. Yeah, Ed Tom is carrying that with him. Even though he gets away, he escapes all of this. He doesn't connect to he doesn't touch anything. Like, it doesn't affect him that way.
Yeah.
And he's still destroyed by it, just because he witnessed it and he knows what it means. And that vaguely setting it in the 80s too makes it feel like there's something else going on. The world is changing and he's the only one who can see it, so he gets out and he'll retire somewhere and he'll know for the rest of his days that he could have saved these people, but he'd be dead too, or maybe he couldn't have saved them, but nothing would be better. That all of it would just be worse if he had engaged. So the sad that final monologue, like to bounce around the movie, that Jones delivers, the thing that Tommy Lee Jones does as an actor that no one else does, I think, is weariness. Mm-hmm. Not in the same way like Hackman can do it, but Jones just lives it. You see the exhaustion in him, and it's at that point where, like, the bags under his eyes they haven't totally taken over his face yet in 2007. Now they kind of have.
No,
they almost look like effects versions of themselves, because as you get older, everything gets larger.
Yeah, if
But-
you don't.
Yeah, if you don't fix it.
Yeah.
But he looks so human and weary and beaten by the end.
Yeah.
Like all of these things he's done, all of these little irritations that he overcomes on a daily basis just to be a police officer have done nothing to change the world. And the story he tells and the way, the pauses, the choices, the way he tells it, and just the clarity in his voice, knowing that it's all over, it's just, it's amazing. And it always goes on longer than I think it does.
The monologue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know where it's going to end. I know the beat, but every time I watch the film, it's just like, no, he's still going. There's more. And it's just, and it's compelling as hell.
Yeah.
But because it's the reverse of the psychiatrist's explanation in Psycho, which is totally unnecessary and just eats up time. This is unnecessary to the plot, but it's so essential to understanding why the film is so sad and what it's about.
Yeah.
That by the time we get there, I just want to live in that. I want him to sing me to sleep, basically.
Yeah, well, it is a sad ending, you know. I mean, so many people die, so many characters die in the film that it's sad in that regard. But Tommy Lee Jones, his Ed Tom, that's what his name is.
It's such a weird name too.
I know.
It's so distinct.
There were moments in watching it on the way out here that I realized that, that line that I've never quite understood what was being said, it's somebody saying his name. It's Ed Tom. It's like, I didn't understand that's what you said. But it's like you said, it's especially sad because you watch Ed Tom in this film and he's so good as a lawman. You know, he doesn't need to pull his gun. He talked about guys that didn't carry him, and then he doesn't even pull his out because he knows nobody's in that trailer. But he tells the junior officer, what's his name? Wendell? Yeah, he tells Wendell up and out, you know, or out and up, I think he says, and they go in the trailer, you know, and he sees the milk and he sees the condensation on the bottle. He's like, he sees everything. When they go out to the desert, he's picking up on everything. I mean, Wendell's pretty good at interpreting it too, but you just get the sense that Ed Tom's been doing this a long time. He's really good at it. He sees everything. He understands people. He understands what happened in crime scenes. And but then as the movie goes on, you start to see the cracks. And the one I noticed this time was when he meets up with Carla Jean in the diner. He tells that story about the local guy that had a run-in with a steer he was trying to slaughter, and he talks about how this thing didn't go the way things were, and he said, so, you know, even what's the line, even in the battle between man and steer, the outcome's not determined or something. And then he says, yeah, but things are different now. They don't kill them that way. They've got this little device that punches a hole in their brain and comes out about that far. And it's like, you're talking about the thing that Shiger uses, but you're not making the connection. You've already been told that there was no bullet in the guy's brain, but there was an entry wound. And so you start to see Ed Tom not being able to handle this new stuff, this stuff that's beyond. They say that a lot.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, he's literally standing outside the hotel room, and Shiger's on the other side of the door. And it's weird. That's a moment in the film where I always forget. I feel like when I'm watching it, it's like, he never opens the door. He's on the other side and he never opens the door. Yeah. But he does open the door, and then he's not there.
Makes it worse.
And then there's clues there. There's like the screw from the vent, and there's a dime that he used to unscrew it, and it's all lying right there. And so Ed Tom could have put it together and figured it out, but he just, this one is beyond him.
Yeah.
And I don't know, being on the other side of the door, it's like that's a tipping point that just he doesn't come back from.
Yeah. Well, and the scene in the diner where he does lay it all out is great, because in any other movie or in a conventional thriller, that would be the moment where he stops talking and has his revelation and realizes what's going on. But this is the real world-ish. Mm-hmm. And the thing that Coens do that almost no other filmmaker's capable of doing, I think, is to convince you that fiction is unfolding the way it would. I mean, it was the genius of Fargo, right? Where they basically lied right up front and said, this is a true story. And your brain justifies literally everything.
Yeah.
All the ridiculous things, all the impossible connections, all the leaps of logic, the things that no human being would rationally do. It's like, well, it's stranger than fiction. It must have happened like this.
Yeah.
And then I remember theatrically, like, it came up at the end. This is a work of fiction based, like the standard disclaimers at the end. And I thought, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. And then I did a little digging. In 1996, it took a little longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. It was an amazing, the fact that you can convince an audience that this is all true by being as outrageous as possible, and have us make the leap for them. We don't suspend our disbelief. We believe.
Yeah. It's real.
Yeah, and in No Country, it plays the same way. It's that grounded approach to this outlandish, outsized story.
Yeah.
Where I believe that, yeah, of course he doesn't make the connection, because why would he? That would take too much. And it would require, as you said, it would require him to think in a way that he's not prepared to.
Yeah.
And connect something so horrible, something so mundane, to being used on human beings, which would be so horrible that he retreats from it, which in the end is exactly what he does.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can make a nail-biting thriller about what's essentially an ethical conundrum, people coming up against the thing that they can't comprehend. It's a natural disaster movie, right? In any other way, it's a plague film. Something is killing people and we have to stop it. But you can't stop it. It won't be stopped.
Yeah, you can't stop it if you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And
you literally can't comprehend what's happening.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah. What was I going to say? You said the Fargo says it's a true story, and you go in assuming it's a true story, and you never doubt it until maybe the end of the movie, or until later you figure out that, no, this was not a true story. And they come right out and tell you it's not a true story in interviews later.
Yeah.
First time I saw the Blair Witch Project, I was misinformed that it was based on truth.
Okay.
And that really shaped my impression of the movie. I really enjoyed the first Blair Witch. It fully affected me, I think, the way it was supposed to. And in part, that was possibly because I had been told it was based on a true urban myth or a story.
Right.
And the same, I think you're right. I mean, one thing this film does that supports that, they don't say it's a true story. Well, don't they say something at the beginning of this one?
I don't remember. I don't think so.
I think maybe in Tom's opening monologue, he says something about it.
Oh, this is a story about... Yeah.
And also there's... I don't know if this even relates to it, but when he talks to Carla Jean about the killing the steer, later when Carla Jean phones him, she says, "Was that story true?"
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "What? What story? Oh, that? Well, it was true in that it was a story."
Yeah.
And that's his, and that's like very meta, But I don't know. I think one of the things another thing that I said in the beginning, that this film validated a lot of things that I want to do in films, and I now do in films. And one of the things is that I believe my stuff is very logic driven. Like even if it's fantasy, like An Invisible Man, I have to be very logical about how he achieves things and what happens, and when things like the scene in my film where he goes into the men's room and he's injured, and he's got to figure, he's trying to figure out what to do with his broken ribs he's got on it, and he sees a towel dispenser, one of those old big cloth rolling towel dispensers, and it was my logic is like he needs a bandage, a tensor bandage, and I was like, what, that would be perfect. And if I was in that situation, and I would pull out my pocket knife, which I wouldn't have, but the character did, and I'd cut it off and I'd reel it out several feet, and I'd cut it again, and then I'd rip it in half, and I'd have strips of bandages to support my broken ribs, and that was the logic that I used to build that scene, because I can't just have him go in there and take his shirt off and tie it around his ribs. It's like he can't just walk in there and happen to find something.
Right.
It's got to be, every step of it's got to make sense, and No Country is brilliant that way. Like how much screen time is devoted to how he gets the satchel full of money in the air vent and then out of the air vent. He has to go to a sporting goods store and get the tent with the most poles and duct tape, and and he's got all the tools. I mean, he buys a shotgun and turns it into a sawed-off shotgun. So he's got the shotgun, he's got a hacksaw, he's got a file to take the burrs off the muzzle. Yep. He does everything. It's all those little details, and then the Coens, or I don't know who to credit, Cormac or the Coens, but together they created this film where every little detail is in the movie. Like how do you open an air vent that's screwed into the wall if you don't have a screwdriver? Well, most people have a dime in their pocket, and that, if you've ever done that, it works. And just those little details, like the whole hotel sequence, or motel, I guess it is. There's so much of that, like he goes in the room, he goes in the office, I need another room. It's like, do you have a map? And he's like, I want that one. You can have the room beside your room. It's like, no, I want that one. And even on this viewing, I was watching, I was thinking, when Chigurh goes in the room and kills the Mexicans, are they in their own room or are they in Llewellyn's room?
Right.
And I had to actually pay attention to see if we saw the number on the door. Because I got the sense they were like in another room waiting for him to come back. But this viewing, I confirmed they are in his room, waiting.
They're decoys, unfortunately.
Yeah, and they come and he goes in there. But I mean, and even the scene where Chigurh rehearses going in the room, where they're going to be. Where's the light switch? And when I walk in, where would they be? There'll be someone here. There might be someone behind this wall, and this wall is thin enough and weak enough that I can blow a shotgun through it. And then there's the bathroom, and they'll be in the bathroom. And he has it all figured out because he rehearsed it. How many movies would actually show you the rehearsal of an execution scene like that?
Yeah.
They just, it's action. He just kicks the door in and shoots everybody. And it's like, no, this movie has to give you all the logic, all the pieces.
Yeah. It's the preparation. It's the effort. It just, and strangling that first deputy, just the work that goes into it. It's that Hitchcock said, it's very famously, it takes a very long time to kill a human being. And nobody cares. Like nobody ever cared to retain that information because murder is just something that's cool in movies. I mean, it looks fantastic if you do it right. It's shocking and thrilling and terrifying, and the Coens just linger on it because it's ugly and unpleasant, and someone is dying.
Well, the strongest visual for me of that opening sequence where he kills the deputy, it's not that you see him slip the handcuffs around to the front. It's not that the timing of the phone call. It's not the choking. It's not the blood. It's all the shoe scuffs on the ground.
Yeah.
There's this radiating pattern of black shoe scuffs from both of them and the kicking. And it just screams of how hard this guy tried to stay alive. Yeah. How many little marks. Every little one of those marks was one of his feet kicking the ground. And it's just like, there's probably 150 of them. It's just, those are the filmmaker details.
Yeah.
You talk about the logic details, but the filmmaking details and the visuals, you got to give it to Deakins too for what he did. But, it's just that every shot is beautiful. Every sound is perfect. Every character makes complete sense. We haven't even really talked about Llewellyn, his character. The first time you see him, he's shooting a deer, or I think it's a deer. I don't know what it is. Out in the desert, and he picks up his casing, and that tells you a lot. He's either very frugal and he reloads his own,
right,
or he's poaching.
Yeah,
I think, and it could be both. But he's poaching, and that's what it tells you. And it's cross-cut. Is that right after the deputy getting killed, or is it right after? Because it's. Yeah,
I think. I haven't seen it as recently as you, but I think it is. I think we're introduced to Chigurh first, and then to.
Yeah, we see him get picked up in the desert, and then so the deputy happens, and then he cleans his hands. I remember watching it yesterday and seeing that there's a cut from what we cut from to the first image of Llewellyn out in the desert poaching. Mm-hmm. There's a logic connection there. It might be that he's using a sight on the deer, and there's something right before it that matches that.
I think that's right.
But it's all intentional to show that Llewellyn is, a smart man, but not necessarily guiltless. Like he's poaching.
Yeah,
that's your introduction. He's poaching, but he's also practical. He rests his rifle, on his boot. He took his boot off, put it on the rock, and he's resting his gun on it. Like those are the details that I love.
Yeah, and of course that's there to tease us into thinking that as the more we see of these characters, that they might be evenly matched.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That Llewellyn might be the guy who gets the drop on him, because that's how it always works. That's how heroes work.
That's how they paint a perfect story here. Is that the two are almost perfectly matched. They're perfectly matched to fight.
Yeah.
But even in the end, Llewellyn's outmatched. Although his, if I remember it right, his demise actually comes at the hand of the Mexicans, right? It's not Chigurh that goes and kills him. It's the Mexicans find him in the hotel, and I think they kill him. I didn't get the sense I get the sense Chigurh comes there after and gets the case. So it's the same randomness as like Shiger getting hit in a car accident at the very end of the movie. You know, like the thing that actually brings Llewellyn down is that the Mexicans find him.
Yeah. So it's his initial illegal act. It's stealing the money.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's classic storytelling. You know you make that one mistake, and you're never recovering from it. Like, you know.
And just at this point, we've seen so many iterations of find a bag of money, bad things happen. You would think he would know better. Of course, it's the early 80s, so maybe he hasn't seen those things that we've seen.
Well, it's interesting because I always think about the movie like, one of my favorite lines is, you know, where are you going, Llewellyn? I'm fixing to do something dumber in hell than I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And I always think that that's what brings him down, this act of kindness, this, you know, dying man's wish, agua. So he goes back out to the desert with water to give to the dying man, and it's all in vain because the guy's dead. And he gets the Mexicans show up, and he ends up shot and in a river and bootless and all that. But I'm not sure if that is what brings him down ultimately, because he has the satchel of money with a transponder in it, right?
Yeah.
So he's already doomed.
Yeah, it's just another movie that I'm thinking of now in a weird way is It Follows, where once you're tainted, it's the classic horror thing.
Yeah.
You can't escape because you don't even know the rules. You don't know how to operate.
Yeah.
And
you don't understand what's out there.
Yeah, and he's a small timer. Whatever else he is, he's not an ambitious man. He doesn't know what he's in for. He simply thinks he can get away with this big bag of money.
Yeah.
And of course you can't.
And the brilliance of it is, like, often when it's like find a bag of money, they focus on the wrong things with the character. They make the character really a good person who really needs this money.
Yeah.
But in this case, as much as he's living in a trailer park, Carla Jean works at Walmart. You know, I mean, he's not homeless living on the street, desperate for money. He's actually got a life, and it's pretty, you know, it's low income, but it's a nice life. He's got a beautiful wife, and she's sweet, and she doesn't seem to mind working at Walmart.
Yeah, they seem happy.
Yeah, so he didn't need the money, but he got the money. And then the focus, I think, on his character is that he's almost smart enough to get away with it. Like, he's just savvy enough. And it's the whole blurring, like, you know, he's not a perfect good guy, but compared to how extreme Shiger is, and I guess he's not the good guy, really, because Ed Tom's the good guy.
Yeah.
It's like he's in the middle. And he's literally in between the two of them. He's, you know, Shiger's after him, and Ed Tom's trying to help him, and Ed Tom comes too late. And that's kind of what breaks him, I think, the fact that he couldn't save Llewellyn.
Yeah.
Even though he gave his word he would. But,
yeah.
I can watch it any number of times. Can't turn it off if I find it on TV. It was the first Blu-ray I ever bought.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like it had come out. It was amazing. And then Blu-rays became available.
Yeah. It's so perfectly calibrated to break you. It's such a terrific experience, and it's beautiful. And I mean, I remember sitting through it. I think they screened it for us at the Cumberland. I saw that and Diving Bell and the Butterfly within 20 minutes of each other, and two of the best films I saw that year. And they were just TIFF pre-screenings, so late August probably. And I just walked out of the theater that day feeling good about everything, just about cinema and about movies and storytelling and all of it. And then 3 months later, There Will Be Blood showed up, and it was shot across the field. You know, the story that one of them had to shut down production because the other one had to blow up the oil well. And I assume it was Paul Thomas Anderson had to blow something up.
Yeah.
But they were shooting at the same time in Marfa, Texas, just across a valley from each other. The same windmill appears in both films, if I remember correctly.
Oh.
And it's just such a strange confluence of talent and story. And the two films are nothing alike, except they both feature characters who are manically determined and unstoppable.
Yeah.
I mean, they're tonally very different, but there's a commonality of purpose between Shiger and Daniel Plainview.
Yeah.
That just amuses me. I just keep thinking they must have ended up at the same bar some night, just sitting and talking about what they were going to do.
I'm sure they did.
And yet, so different. And so perfect. And yeah, the casting, again, we didn't really talk about Kelly MacDonald, but someone who I'd only really known from Trainspotting more than anything else, and here she is 11 years later in a completely different mode.
Yeah.
And she's great. And the Coens somehow knew that she could sell it. That, like, their casting instincts have long since been established, but this one really does have a perfectly packaged cast. It's all faces. It's all minimalist performances. Even Bardem is sort of stopped down from some of the bigger, think about what he's doing in Skyfall, or even Vicky Cristina Barcelona, where he's just sort of selling himself. And here he just exists. He's got that creepy stillness.
Well, the story I heard was that when he broke out in the indie world and Hollywood said, already come.
Yeah.
They basically, they said, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to work with the Coens and I want to work with Woody Allen.
Nice.
And that's what led to those two roles. Like, obviously, as people reached out to the Coens and said, I don't know if you've seen this guy's work, and he's, we're repping him. He loves you guys. If you got a part for him, he wants you to keep him in mind. And somehow he became Chigurh. And I can just imagine how that goes. It's like you walk in the room and it's like, okay, you're going to be Chigurh, but we're going to give you a weird haircut.
Yeah.
We're going to put you in a like almost childlike denim jacket. You're going to walk. You're going to look like an idiot basically, but you're going to be one of the darkest characters ever created for cinema. Okay.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that caliber of, like, I know Woody's in, under a big cloud right now, but he's the same. Like, he basically writes movies where he has people in mind for them, and then he just reaches out to those people and says, I wrote this for you, I want you to be in it. And most people go, yes, I'll be in a Woody Allen movie. And,
yeah.
Don't know if that's going to continue happening.
No, I think the tide's already sort of shifting against that, and people have come out and, people who, Rebecca Hall has sort of recanted her last role with him.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, I won't work with him again and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, that's a whole other conversation about, the man versus the work. You can't deny his work.
It's a thing that comes up here fairly often, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
We've done episodes on Polanski films and Woody Allen films, and it always.
Have you done Vicky Cristina Barcelona?
No, not that one. I've done. I think the only one so far has been Annie Hall. Okay. Jeremy Lalonde picked that a couple of years ago.
Because because Vicky Cristina Barcelona is like one of my favorites.
Really?
Yeah, it's so weird. His films are sometimes so hit and miss. Like, I started watching Wonder Wheel. It turned up on Amazon Prime, and I was, I didn't get to see that because it barely played anywhere. Mm. And I started watching it, and probably about 20, 30 minutes in, and I'm just like, the dialogue feels so stagey, and it's Kate Winslet, like, how can she mess anything up? But it just feels really stagey. And then you look at something like Vicky Cristina Barcelona, apart from, there's certain scenes that are kind of stagey, but the stuff between Javier Bardem and
Penelope Cruz,
it's just brilliant. Like the sequence where it's like, speak English. We speak English here. It's just like, it's almost Mamet-esque. It's like Woody at his best, when he's got these actors that are just like this multi-dialogue threads happening simultaneously. And the irony of, he keeps telling, speak English, we speak English here, but then he starts speaking in Spanish and doesn't correct himself. And it's just, I don't know. This No Country and Vicky Cristina Barcelona were the films that just put Javier on my... Oh, and of course, Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful was actually one of the corollaries for my film, like, in terms of wanting to do a very real human story. Even though we had an invisible man in our story, it was like, I still want the real world, the small town living, the life, the family, the job. I want it to have that real, tactile, mundane quality that you see in Beautiful. Right. So that was one of our corollaries.
Well, that's interesting. And Beautiful has a fantastical element lurking in the background.
It does, yeah. I tend to forget that. You know, like, you don't realize that he's actually clairvoyant, or whatever you want to call it.
Whatever it is really happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's... Well, and that does kind of bring me logically to the question about your work, and what of, if anything, what of No Country have you borrowed or absorbed into your own creative DNA? But it's a larger question, I suppose, if you see... Well, the thing about the unseen, we were talking before we started recording, the thing that I really admire about it is that it works as a character study that also has a fantastical element in it, but if you remove one or the other, the story still works. Yeah. It works as a genre piece, or it works as a character study. And just the idea of someone who is marginalized and then literally disappearing, it's such an easy leap to make, but no one's ever done it in a way that actually respects the concept of a marginalized character rather than just using it as a lever into a bigger adventure story.
Yeah.
Like, your movie is small and stays small. It stays focused.
Yeah.
Is that something that you got from No Country? You, like, never take your eye off the ball? Or?
I'm not sure if I got that from No Country. I mean, some of the reviews of The Unseen, they said that it, the man represents the fading working class.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of small towns, they thrived on industry, and those industries are drying up, and people are moving to the bigger cities, and the small towns are dying, and people pointed that out about the film, and I was like, well, that's great. Of course I meant to put that there. Yes. But I mean, there is some of that. There's No Country's about change and not understanding what's coming, and you living in the ways that you were used to, and that things change. I don't know. I think No Country was more inspired the way I write characters, the way they talk.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, I mean, there's obviously a lot of films that inspire how I write characters and their dialogue, but the first thing that really shaped how I write characters was David Mamet.
Okay.
I was at university, and I took a course on playwriting, and not writing, but on playwrights, and he was one of the ones we studied. And the second I read his play, I was like, this is how people talk in a slightly stylized version, but really this is how people talk. And it shaped, if I got one thing out of 4 years of university in my English degree, was discovering Mamet. And then Cormac McCarthy has shaped the way I write characters. Now that I've started reading his stuff, I've watched his films, but now also going back and reading his books, it shapes how I write characters. And I grew up loving Westerns, so I love the Western type characters, and I'll put them in anything I can. And I do think that Bob Langmore, the gruff, small town sawmill worker, millwright character, he is a Western type character. He's like the man with no name. He's gruff and few words, and
yeah. You definitely get the sense that he'd rather not be talking to people, even when he has to.
Yeah, and I mean, I think story-wise it makes sense because he's hiding a big secret. Mm-hmm. He wants to avoid any conversation, any interaction, keep people at a distance, But it's definitely the Western-type characters that inspired me, and this being a contemporary Western, it spoke to me. I forget where it fit in my timeline, but I wrote a script for a short film that I haven't made, and it was a Western. And then I expanded it to a feature. But before I wrote the feature, actually no, that's what it was. I saw this film, and I went on a road trip with my dad in BC to some of the small towns that he'd worked in 30, 40 years earlier.
Okay.
And I saw these small Canadian towns fading. They're like turning into ghost towns, but it's not the Wild West, it's BC, and it's now. So seeing that and seeing this movie motivated me to change the Western I was going to write to a contemporary Western.
Okay.
And I haven't made the film yet, but it's called Hangfire, and it's set in a small northern town. It's actually a supernatural thriller, but it's very much Western type characters, small town characters, and I put a lot of that in The Unseen too, like the small town characters that I grew up with, the kind of guys that drive pickup trucks and work in sawmills. And I mean, the main character of Bob is based on a longtime friend of mine that I grew up with, and he still works in a sawmill, and he tells me stories, and I put some of that in the movie. And, yeah.
I find that, I mean, I was going to say that the archetypal Western is back, but it's never really gone away, has it? I mean, the idea of independent people fighting for their own interests and inevitably on a collision course with one another, whether it's legal or illegal, whether it's moral or immoral. It's Breaking Bad. It's what was the other thing I was thinking of just recently that's basically a Western? Sweet Virginia, Jamie Dagg's film.
I haven't seen it yet.
It takes place at a motel in Alaska, more or less, but it's the same thing. It's a man comes to town, a man leaves town, and bad things happen in between. And it's all about, I think now it's all about the focus on the individual, the idea that there is, still someone willing to step up
Yeah.
whatever that is, whatever they're stepping up for.
It's the code. It's doing the right thing. It's the the old ways, the right ways.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, they say almost everybody says they love westerns, but almost nobody goes and sees them when Hollywood actually makes them.
Yeah.
And for that reason, Hollywood won't make them. Like if you go to LA and you talk to people about making movies, and you say you want to make a western, you better be Michael Mann or someone who's got this incredible track record, and they go, yes, you should make a western. I talked to Frank Darabont at a film festival at one point, and I think I said to him, you should make a western, and he said, I've actually been developing one with Tom Hanks. Okay. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but they said, everybody loves them, everyone wants to make them, but nobody goes to them, and they don't travel, apparently. That's one of the genres they say don't travel. You can sell them North America, there's a certain audience for them, but in the world there really isn't.
Yeah.
So every once in a while you get a great one like Open Range and stuff.
That was the last great American Western that I can think of. And Sweet Country, Warwick Thornton's film that was at TIFF last year. It's Australian. It sort of has an exception that way because it's historical, but it has Western textures and elements. Yeah. But I think if you asked him straight out, he would say it wasn't a Western.
Yeah. I mean, The Revenant was what I would call a frontier Western. I put it in the camp with Jeremiah Johnson.
Yeah, man versus environment.
Yeah, rather than good guy, bad guy sort of thing. Although there's a bad guy, but
yeah. Well, The Unseen doesn't really have a bad guy either. Right?
Yeah, that was
just it's the economic situation, the realities that people face.
Yeah.
That make them do things.
Well, I read a book by Stephen King about writing. I think it's called On Writing.
On Writing, yeah.
And he's it's a very simple book, but one of the things he says is you pick a character, you put him in a circumstance, and you go with it. And that kind of stuck with me. So I just came up with the idea, Invisible Man, what would he do in our world, or even a more isolated world? Like I didn't want to have him living in LA and he's turning invisible. So it's like he's an invisible man in Canada. What would he do? Well, he'd isolate himself to protect his family, protect his secret, and all that. And so I think that's why my story just started as, this is him, this is his problem, this is where he is, and these are the decisions he makes. It wasn't like, and who's going to be the bad guy? Because in most Invisible Man stories, the bad guy is a government agency that finds out about them and they want to experiment on them or use them as super soldiers or whatever.
Right.
And I was like, no, we're not doing that. So we're not going to have a government agent. There isn't even going to be a cop looking for him. It's not even going to be that predictable. So there really wasn't an antagonist until he had to make a deal with the devil to go find his daughter. And it's one of those, it's kind of like finding a satchel of money. It seems like an easy enough thing. Just take this to Vancouver, drop it off, pick something up, bring it back. Don't even want to know what it is. Just do it. But circumstances work against him. He's gone longer than he thought. The guy gets twitchy and it's threatening him, and then there's not to give away secrets, but there's a sort of a double cross in there that has nothing to do with Bob, but it still motivates the third act. And I mean, those are the kind of things that were inspired subconsciously by films like No Country.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's the sense that a neophyte can figure out, I'll be fine, I know what I'm doing, and just being completely overmatched by the world. It's not even by circumstance necessarily. It's just, this is what happens when you go somewhere you shouldn't be or pick up something you shouldn't pick up. Yeah, it's a moral breach that brings hell down on everyone. Yeah,
and I mean, there's a first act, I guess it would be first act twist that is really quite random. He has a car accident that leads to what he has to do next.
Yeah.
And I think in the script it was random. It just like bad luck. It actually was. In the script originally it was a car crosses the middle lane and he just has to avoid it and he crashes his truck. But partly the logistics of doing a stunt sequence with one car going out of control versus two cars in our budget, it kind of became like, don't know if we can do two cars. And then I think it was Aiden that, because one of his big contributions to the whole film was that, and I don't even know when he realized it or when he shared it, but he concluded that the process of him fading away piece by piece was painful.
Oh, that was him.
Yeah. The idea was in the script that injuries accelerated it. And his car accident accelerates it. And when he gets his face banged up, then things, anywhere that his body experiences trauma, my logic was, if he gets punched in the nose, he breaks his nose, when the tissue of his nose starts healing, it heals as invisible tissue.
Okay.
And then there's sort of a radiating effect. So anywhere that he's suffered a trauma, I mean, there is a genetic thing. It's implied like it's a genetic disease that flares up at a certain point in his life. But the idea was that trauma and injury accelerated it.
Mm-hmm.
But then from that, I think Aidan extrapolated that it was painful. So it's not just that he broke a rib that he's hurting. He's hurting all over because of this transformation he's going through.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of it.
I thought that was something. I mean, I know that was something I'd never seen before. Just the idea, because in Hollow Man, during the transformation sequence, it's a big deal that he's in pain.
Yeah, he's screaming.
That they're suffering. And I thought, yeah, sure, it's a traumatic experience. Yeah. But the idea of it happening more slowly makes it a disease. It makes it much more identifiable and relatable. And I remember, the first time, I saw the film almost 2 years ago now, and I remember thinking, yeah, that's really unsettling. Like, that concept of body horror is that this thing is happening to you constantly. And wherever, whatever it is, it made me see him as, it's almost like watching an animal with cancer.
Yeah.
When you can't explain to it what's happening and it can't understand it.
Aidan told me some things about how he saw it that is similar to what you just said.
Yeah.
I had one response from a reviewer a podcast guy who called me and talked about the film, and he told me that his day job was he worked, I think, in palliative care.
Okay.
So he worked with people that were facing end of life, and he said this movie screamed to him about somebody in that state. And not just because Bob's character is considering killing himself to protect everyone from his secret, but just that it's a disease and it's progressing and you're losing yourself to it.
Yeah, literally.
And so
in this case,
that was another one of those things that's like, yeah, I totally thought of that when I wrote it. It's like, no, but I'll take that,
Yeah.
So.
It's just a take on it that I hadn't seen before. And literally. And it's...
We're pretty proud of that, actually. We feel like we've created a new take on the Invisible Man and an iconic Canadian character. I saw a post yesterday where somebody said, they said that the Unseen had given us a Canadian Invisible Man, and they mentioned Wolf Cop had given us a Canadian Wolf Man, and so where's Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Mummy or something, or a Creature?
The next ones.
Yeah, like.
Will we even have a Creature from the Black Lagoon? Do we have an Amazon? Del Toro kind of did it.
Yeah, that's what one of the comments said. Well, we had Shape of Water, and they shot that in Toronto, so that kind of counts. But
exactly, they had to fly him in. They had to bring him in from the Amazon.
I don't want to sound like a pretentious artist, but it's. As I've been creating things, I feel like every once in a blue moon, I create something that I go, wow, that's truly original. Or that really worked.
Yeah.
I forget my examples. I used to have a short list of the things where it's like, whoa, I did something really good. A lot of it is just work or attempts at getting somewhere. But every once in a while, you have like a really good idea or a really good execution of an idea. And definitely in that camp is the idea that I reinvented the Invisible Man in my way. Yeah. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out,
Yeah, I think I'm glad it's finally getting a release. It's one of those things where it's hard to sell a movie that does something different with genre. Yeah. Although I think we're at a place now where it's easier to get audiences to understand when you're taking a risk with something they think they know. Yeah. We're more open to stuff like Hereditary and It Follows and maybe The Guest. Those are all movies that present you with a thing and then proceed to completely rearrange what that thing is and count on you knowing the history of horror and genre. And The Unseen isn't really like that because it's not really a horror film. Not really. No. It's much more operationally realistic.
I describe it as a dramatic film with a genre vein.
Yeah,
running through it.
That's a good way to put it.
Because it's some of it was logistics and some of it was budget. Like most people that would think you're going to do an Invisible Man movie, like the Johnny Depp one that may or may not even happen in the new Dark universe.
Kill it.
Yeah. Actually, somebody told me that their take on The Unseen is this is what Universal should have done. If they want to reimagine all those movies, this is the kind of reimagining they should do, not what they did with Tom Cruise and The Mummy.
Yeah, that was just that that film demonstrated to me that they're not ready to do the Dark Universe or whatever it is that they think they're doing. It's just, you've made Life Force. Do you not notice that you've made Life Force? Life Force is 30 years old, and it should stay where it is. These things don't... reinterpretations are fantastic, but you have to come up with a reason for the reinterpretation to be happening in universe, and nothing in The Mummy did that. But yeah, as far as genre reinterpretation and reinvigoration, it feels like we're at a place now where we could radically redesign the iconography of horror, that there is a way to do stories, but people always want the thing that they think will be easiest to sell. Yeah. So you get The Mummy and you get...
I don't think it's so much the audience that's the problem, it's the people that know they have to sell the movie and make a profit. They're afraid to try new things. They don't know how they're going to sell things that are different or weird. We're kind of finding that right now with this film. We're not getting as much distribution as in the world as we would hope. Given you look at the critical acclaim and you think, oh, that's going to lead to people wanting to see it and demand for it, and it just doesn't happen. They'll find the next Insidious and release that wide across North America. And it's the same thing we've seen 10 times in the last 10 years.
But the brand sells, the package sells,
the poster sells.
I wish that critical acclaim translated into box office, because it would make my job a lot more valued. But the thing I keep coming up against is the idea of permanence, where theatrically it'll have a short life, but it'll never go away. Like, it'll be on VOD, it'll be on disc, it'll be around for people to discover. And I think that this is the kind of film that will be discovered. Like, No Country for Old Men wins the Oscar. It's distributed by Miramax or Disney. It's never going to go away. It's a huge film that is strangely one of the Coen's most successful films, even though it's just so distinct from their other work. I mean, I'm glad they won all the Oscars for stuff. I'm glad it happened with Fargo, but it's great that this is out there in the world, but it's not the movie I point to show people what the Coens do.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that when the movie opened, it wasn't a huge success immediately.
Oh, it was a platform release, right? And I know it took a while.
Yeah, like opening weekend, 1.2 million in the U.S. U.S. gross 74 million, worldwide 172. If I remember right, it was more winning the Oscar that really spearheaded the box office.
That's when that still happened, right? When a film could benefit from it.
Yeah.
But nothing ever disappears anymore.
Well, it's funny. I'll tell you one thing. Like I said, every once in a while, I feel like something I create or come up with or write, it's like, oh, that's as close to a truly original idea as I think I can muster.
Yeah.
And reinventing The Invisible Man the way we did, I had that feeling. And then one of the thoughts I had later was, even though books are becoming obsolete, is like, this is going to end up in one of those monster books where they talk about the history of monsters in film. There's going to be a chapter on The Invisible Man. Yeah. And so going forwards, the writers that actually find my film, they'll include it, because it's a new chapter in the evolution of The Invisible Man as a film character and depiction of film. And I thought, like 15, 20 years ago, I would be the guy buying that book about monster movies. And now I know that at some point my film will be at least immortalized in those maybe on Wikipedia. I don't know.
So is there another creature you want to try to redefine, or was this the one that you wanted to do?
I don't know if there is another one I want to redefine.
Nobody's made a perfect Wendigo movie yet.
No, and nobody's made a good Bigfoot movie. I did write one, but I was asked. I met somebody who reportedly had money to invest in film, and they were looking for something, and they said they wanted something formulaic. And so I thought, well, I think I could do a take on a Bigfoot movie that would be formulaic but still cool, because we haven't really had anything. Yeah. And then I wrote it and I gave it to them, and they said it's too formulaic. So that's another one that's sitting on a shelf. I don't know if anything will ever happen to it. I wrote something recently that's a little bit Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in a sense. You could call it a reimagination of that. I definitely, when we made the Unseen and it was finished and people were appreciating it, it did make me start thinking, you know, what more could I do with this kind of thing? There was some interest in turning it into a TV series. And I thought, well, do you just
do that?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to, but when I was trying to figure out how I would do that, I did start to expand the scope. I didn't want to just do a story about invisible people in the world. I thought, well, what if there's invisible people, but there's also like the real world version of vampires or other monsters that we consider classic monsters. Well, actually, one of the corollaries that I didn't hear, I don't know if I ever heard it from anyone, but I think that The Unseen owes a lot to Near Dark.
The practical treatment of...
Well, yeah, the real world treatment. Like, for me, Near Dark was the first and only vampire movie. I mean, I've never really loved vampire movies. You know, the classic Dracula and, you know, the visual treatment of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. But vampires in general haven't interested me. And when I saw Near Dark, I was like, this is awesome because this is what they would really be like.
Yeah.
So I did think that there was a connection between The Unseen and that this is like a very gritty, real-world version of vampires. And I've given you a sort of really real, down-to-earth version of Invisible Man. So I think the vampire one's already been done.
Yeah. That's a good one, too.
Oh, yeah.
It's a pretty great movie.
It's a bit underrated. Catherine Bigelow. Yeah, I mean, to circle back to No Country, I do really think that Bob and Llewellyn Moss are similar characters in a lot of ways. You know, they're facing a problem and they're trying to deal with it logically and practically, and they have, you know, loved ones to look out for. You know, like pretty much everything Llewellyn Moss does is trying to protect Carla Jean from it. Mm-hmm. And even though Chigurh says that he had a chance to save you, but he chose to save himself, and she says, not like that. And you know what she means. Like, he didn't do it selfishly. He did it so they could live. He wasn't trying to save himself. He's, you know, and that's what Bob's doing. He's trying to protect his family by isolating himself. He's trying to protect his family by killing himself, you know. And so I do think they're very similar problem-solving kind of characters. And I think I'm kind of, I guess you write what you know. So I'm a bit of a problem solver, you know, like, it's just how I function. So, and it's part of, when I started doing my day job, makeup effects, working on film sets, you know, I used to tell people that what I really am is a problem solver. And a lot of people in film are problem solvers, you know. Right. Like, some people have very specific jobs and they do the job and it's the same thing over and over again, repetition. But a lot of what we do, you know, in film is just problem solving, you know. As a makeup effects person, you know, something, you bring it to set and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and you've got to improvise, you've got to change it, you've got to rebrig it on the fly. You know, it's problem solving. And as a writer, well, as a director on set, it's always problem solving, you know. It's like you get there and the location isn't what it was supposed to be, or some weird little logistic thing. Like, I mean, how many filmmakers have rewritten the scene on the fly because they get there and the car won't start?
Yeah.
So the big driving sequence turns into a parked sequence, and the location is locked and they can't get in, so they shoot it outside instead of inside.
Yeah. I'm always, it never ceases to amaze me how rain can change everything.
Yeah.
Just, you know, like, you can't count on the environment, so you shoot a different scene a different way, and then all of a sudden you unlock something.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a better film, or it's a different film, and either way it's the thing you have to go with anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about practicality.
Yeah. We had snow in our film, and it was all real snow. Like, we didn't have the budget to actually have fake snow. Well, we dressed fake snow into the garbage dump, but we didn't have any money to really, like, do snow effects. Like, in real film, if you want it to snow, you bring fake snow and big fans, and then you make it snow. And if it is actually snowing, great, but you got to be ready for it to stop snowing. And then you make it snow. Mm-hmm. Same with rain, you know. Like, a lot of scenes in movies, the world is wet.
Yeah.
And we make it wet because if it starts raining, we can't make it dry. So that's why we do wet downs, where we bring in a water truck and we hose down all the roads and the sidewalks and everything so that they look wet. And then if it starts raining, we're not screwed. But we had a scene in my film where we were outside the sawmill and it was snowing, and it was brought to my attention that we're shooting in this direction and it's snowing. If by the time we finish shooting this and we turn around and shoot the other actor, if it stops snowing, you're not going to be able to cut it together. You're going to see snow and no snow, snow and no snow. And it was just one of those, indie moments where you just go, we're going to go for it, because it looks amazing. And we're just going to pray that it keeps snowing. And we're going to get turned around as quick as we can, because it's like real world stuff like snow and real light. And it just all looks so great on film. We enhance things like the weather, but there's nothing like, our northern locations and the small town locations where there's Kelowna, BC, it's snow, it's lakes, it's mountains, it's just gorgeous, and we got all that for free by driving 5 hours out of Vancouver, that's what it cost us, really.
My thanks to Geoff Redknap, whose very good first feature, The Unseen, arrives on iTunes today. And you can catch up to his makeup effects work in Tully, Deadpool 2, and next month's Alpha. You can follow Geoff on Twitter at Geoff Redknap, all one word, and you can find No Country for Old Men on Blu-ray and DVD from Lionsgate in the US and Alliance in Canada. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever, it would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
Hold it, fellas. I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.